Well, also joining this panel from New Delhi is the convener of the Foreign Affairs Cell of the Bharatiya Janata Party, Seshadri Chari. Mr. Chari, welcome, and good evening to you from Washington. Dr. Stephen Cohen, not that, I want to start by taking off on what former Foreign Minister Salman Khurshid said in that comment in the part of that news report where Americans like to talk specific issues and they don't like big talk. They like to see action. In your views, there's been enough talk from Narendra Modi so far. How are you viewing this visit? I mean, has it now got to move into the next phase?
Well, I'm waiting to see who he's going to appoint as defense minister, or as an acting defense minister now, and because much of the relationship is going to function around weapons purchases and modernization of the Indian military. And without that, I think that India is going to go nowhere. He has to have a serious person who knows about defense matters as his full-time defense minister.
So you say the entire core issue right now is on the area of defense cooperation?
No, it's one of the critical building blocks. The economic investment will take its natural course as India opens up. Ron Summers can talk about that. There'll be more American interest in India. But in terms of one particular sector, the defense relationship, because that involves foreign policy. If we sell India X kind of weapon, what is that weapon going to be used for? Will they have confidence that we're going to supply spare parts? So that's a deeper relationship.
What about technology transfer?
And that applies to technology also. If we sell the Javelin technology, who are they going to use the Javelin against? And will we supply spare parts in a crisis, say, with Pakistan? I don't know. These are the issues.
But are you then saying that Americans expect India's foreign policy to be guided by its defense cooperation with America to some extent?
It's a critical element of it, but not guided. The overall strategic relationship is going to be economic, cultural, diplomatic, and political. But there's a military component as well.
But then Indian interests would also be hinged to that, Dr. Cohen. We would also expect that as the countries which you are supplying so much defense weapons to, and I think America is now the biggest defense supplier to India, that we would also ask in turn that you reset your relationship with Pakistan.
That's right. I
and
agree.
Look more at the Indian interests.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that dialogue has happened yet. Partly because,
why?
Partly because we're distracted. I think America has been, sees South Asia as flyover country. We're interested in the Middle East. We're interested in East Asia. So the pivot brought us from the Middle East to East Asia. But in fact, that meant it looking the other way when it came to India.
This is very interesting, Ambassador.
I don't entirely agree with Dr. Cohen, so I'd like to argue with him a bit.
Yeah, please do.
First of all, to go back to where you started, talk versus action. Yes, Americans are famously drawn to the concrete, but I think there's a lot of conceptual conversation that needs to happen. And the important thing to remember is that over the past 15 years, India and the United States have been on kind of a voyage of discovery and have discovered a lot of areas where their interests, in fact, do coincide. Pakistan is still a problem area, although there are even some aspects there where our ultimate goals are very similar. But if you look at Indian Ocean security, East Asia security, the prosperity of the whole Asian region, basically going from India on east, you've got a tremendous overlap in interests. And for that reason, I think this whole concern about anybody guiding anybody else's foreign policy is probably a little bit overdrawn. I can understand it on a historical basis. And it is true that the U.S. is accustomed to dealing with weaker powers. And so the U.S. has some learning to do about how to manage a relationship with a country like India. But I think the U.S. is looking for a real relationship, not just for somebody who will cheerfully be led around by the nose, since that clearly is not a description that would ever be suitable for India.
No, I think both of you have made very solid and if I may say contrary points from where you stand, and I find this very, very interesting. I'd only, Ambassador, like to point out that India has consistently had its own independent foreign policy, and we've taken contrary positions vis-a-vis America in international forums. We've also taken contrarian positions vis-a-vis Russia in international forums, and there is a genuine worry among some sections in India that we would like to have a relationship as equals with America, but none of the other issues which we have should not make us sort of a cheerleader of the Americans. That I don't think is going to happen.
I think this is something that we're basically going to have to learn how to do. In theory, everybody agrees. And I can't think of any American official who deals seriously with India that expects India to give up its independent foreign policy. Nobody.
Yes.
But then how do you do this in practice?
Yeah. Yes. I agree with Ambassador Schaffer. If you go back 10, 15 years, the relationship is totally different. It's much better. It's more normal.
Yes.
But if you had tomorrow a conflict with Pakistan, which is entirely possible, a conflict with China, where would the Americans come down? I don't know. Would we back India? Would we not back India? I'm not quite sure what we do. I don't think the Indian government does either. So you can't be non-aligned on all issues. In a sense, there has to be some convergence on policy.
If I may say so, Pakistan is a problem that both of us share.
That's right.
When we look at issues of convergence that bring us together, may I propose that Pakistan should also be one of those issues which bring us together?
That with China is a problem. The Chinese have much the same problem.
Yes, they do. Now, these two gentlemen on both sides of the table also raised their hands very gently as both of you were speaking. Who goes first? Ron.
Could I say, I think already a success. My goodness.
The Modi visit.
We were in New York together on Saturday. Think of how the day began at the 9/11 memorial, an expression of solidarity on the issue of terrorism, an extraordinary speech before the United Nations, where he basically put Nawaz Sharif right in his place in the sense, how can you talk about terrorism when you're still harboring the camps, when in fact 9/11 you were harboring Osama bin Laden, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, the whole hypocrisy of that. Then the speech last night at Madison Square Garden, he has catalyzed the Indian-American community of 3 million people like never before, and I would say I've not seen this level of enthusiasm since the U.S.-India civil nuclear deal announced in 2005. This is an extraordinary opportunity now as he meets the U.S. CEOs, as he did this morning for breakfast, as he goes into the Obama meeting, where he's able to really carry with him 3 million Americans of Indian origin.
You think that makes an impact?
Oh, sure. 3 million Americans.
They're not a politically mobilized group. They're not a politically mobilized group, are they? What do you think?
They're very
starting to be. They're starting to be. Now, they've been mobilized on both sides of the political fence, which makes it interesting. The BJP apparatus in the United States tends to be more Republican. There are other parts of the Indian American community that tend to be more Democratic, but it's not a constituency that has a political direction.
So do you think, Ambassador, that with that kind of a backing among the 3 million Indian American, that gives Modi more clout or adds to it, makes any difference at all?
Tiny bit.
Tiny bit.
Tiny bit. It's nothing significant. It's something that American politicians will cater to because they want the contributions from Indian Americans, but it's not a major factor.
Yeah. So Maroof, interesting how Dr. Stephen Cohen began this. He said, I want to know who your defense minister is going to be, because the only critical issue between both the countries, or the critical issue, will be defense. And he's probably right, because by some conservative estimates, India will spend $80 to $100 billion on defense in the next decade, which means the kind of money that America has made with India, which is about $8-9 million, I think, since billion dollars,
more than
since 2008. Yeah. The Americans will be slurping at the opportunity of $50 billion of business with India. But, that also gives us so much more headroom to have a serious conversation on our issues with the Americans. How are we going to do that?
I mean, all the panelists here are far more distinguished than I am. But, if I can sort of take off on some of the points they've made, I think the most important thing is, for India, an independent foreign policy is an article of faith.
Yeah.
And if you have to deal with India, you have to deal, in as much if you deal with Pakistan like you deal with Pakistan, you have to deal with their obsession about Kashmir. And you have to factor that in. That will keep coming up in their conversations. So India's independence of foreign policy, foreign policy to me and to many of us in India is not about being either you're with us or against us. I think generally we are with the United States, but there are issues. For instance, Iran, we have 14 to 17% oil dependence on Iran. You may have shale gas, we don't have shale gas. So we have to keep building up on that dependence. Look at the defense partnership. I think the point Professor Cohen was making was that's one area in which there have been huge steps taken as against in the other issues in the strategic relationship. And therefore it is very important to have, and I think Professor Cohen is not the only one who says that. There are any number of op-eds that have come out in Indian newspapers that say that we need an attentive full-time defense minister, more so in the Indian context, context where we have a bureaucracy which is fumbling along. I mean, you talk, Arnab, of Indo-US military joint exercises. I've spoken to US officials, and they're exasperated with the bureaucracy which doesn't know the front of a rifle from a rear, but is calling all the shots in this whole military relationship. And likewise, I think there are two other issues that you may like to ask the distinguished panel here. That, we talk of CEO relationship and high teas with CEO, but the CEOs are too distracted to look at India. They have to have a points person. You have to have an India desk in the companies, which will then build up the relationship with India, because you can't have the head of Boeing focusing on India only when India may have a 27% growth rate in its aerospace market, but there are other things Boeing has to look at. So I think there is that one issue, and the second...
let's look at broader issues. I wanted to pick up the issue of trust between these two countries on this conversation.
If I may just strengthen your point, yes, and that is the trust between the two countries will come only when you appreciate that we've been hammered by cross-border terror attacks for 3 decades or more, and we cannot have this acceptance in America that we need Pakistan till we are in Afghanistan and then we look at your case.
Ambassador,
you can't have it that way.
This is a genuine concern, because people in India who are watching Obama's speech at the UNGA made 2 observations. One, they said he's looking increasingly helpless, like he got the calculation entirely wrong vis-a-vis the ISIS. The other concern they had was that, why is he not talking significantly longer about the Al-Qaeda? Just because his attention is now moved, Professor Cohen, his attention, Professor Cohen, is therefore moved to ISIS. What happens to the Al-Qaeda? What happens to the Haqqani network? What happens in the region? As America moves away, is it fair to worry about the fact that America leaves its problems behind and doesn't look to resolving?
I think that's a legitimate concern, and we've not taken India that seriously until the Mumbai attacks. Then because Americans went
2008, yeah.
And in a sense, that's what brought us back to the region. But again, there's a tendency to deal with the most critical issue first and only. As for verification, trusting, it has to be verification. I worked for Ronald Reagan, who said trust but verify. So a lot of our agreements and understandings are the Indians want trust, but we want verification. We want to see Indians do specific things that will work. And I'd say the Indian defense establishment is one. Why is India buying billions of dollars of weapons from abroad? Because it can't make it itself. That's where we should be helping India manufacture and sell these things on the open market commercially.
But the relationship did sink, did it not? I mean, the relationship got vitiated. And
let me trace the history. Very thin relationship throughout the Cold War years. We basically didn't have much to say to one another. Remarkable transformation, which I would sort of start from 2000, although some bases were laid before that, yes. And the Clintons' epic visit to India. High point, 2005 to 9, the years during which the nuclear deal was negotiated. And that was a remarkable exercise, unlike any other negotiation in U.S.-India history. And then everybody kind of exhausted themselves on that negotiation, and both sides lost focus. It was probably more obvious on the U.S. side because you had a crisis sitting right next door in Pakistan. But India-U.S. relations don't do well on lack of attention. It's a high-maintenance relationship. And so the low point was after the Devyani Khobragade episode. And we're clearly coming back from that. You don't have to deal with ill will. You have to deal with some unhappiness on the business side, and I think Ron can talk more eloquently about that. Yes. And that is genuinely unhappiness. But there isn't any ill will, of which there was some during the Cold War years.
May I just...
So you have to... The question is, how do you turn what is essentially a passively benign environment into one that's more actively engaged?
Just 2 small points, if I may say, of slight disagreement with you. I don't feel Devyani was the lowest point in the relationship. I feel if you ask a lot of Indians, they'll find the snooping controversy the lowest point in the relationship. When despite, we signed an MOU to promote closer cooperation on cybersecurity, a timely exchange of information between organizations of respective countries responsible for cybersecurity. Instead, what we got was snooping into Indian systems, revelations that Indian embassies were being snooped upon. The BJP was also under surveillance. And when asked about this whole issue, John Kerry in New Delhi gave some kind of a template response. So that actually, at a government-to-government level, that was another low point.
No, America snoops on everybody.
No.
I mean, the Germans, they snoop on all their friends and allies, so it's not just us.
Well, you know,
what I would say,
Maroof, at the end of the day, that we are talking about mistrust.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I don't think it's adding to the level of trust between two large and mature nations to come together.
Arnab, I think that when you're talking about the U.S. and India, in the first instance, you're going to see trust created issue by issue rather than across the board. I would like it to be different, but I don't think it will be different.
Yes. I also now want to go across to one critical issue of where
the greatest trust builder in the past 20 years was the
business.
Business, but I'm talking about at the high levels of government. When President Clinton called Vajpayee during the Kargil episode.
Yeah. I think that.
No, I'm not suggesting that we have a crisis so you can have a phone call every few weeks. That's not a good idea.
I think Clinton's intervention at the time of the Kargil crisis, and I think that, you know, when Nawaz Sharif was in Blair House, that conversation, I think, will go down in history as a very critical moment. Before I go on, and many of our viewers, Dr. Cohen, want to get a view from you and others on where America sees the strategic relationship vis-a-vis India, whether it is going to be a utilitarian relationship vis-a-vis China, whether there can be some quadrangular understanding between Australia, Japan, India, and the United States, whether it's necessary at all or not. From a world order overview, I'd like to get your sense on that. But before that, may I go across to Seshadri Chari, who's been patiently waiting. First of all, apologies to keep you waiting. I wanted to get the discussion started here and then engage you in it. Mr. Chari, Mr. Modi will be speaking at the Council for Foreign Relations in about 25 minutes from now. Do you think he'll send out a message at that CFR speech, which will then be the basis on which he will take his discussions in Washington forward? Mr. Chari, over to you.